Here is Tanchjim's new in-ear monitor, the Fola. I've actually been able to test, listen, and keep coming back to it over the course of about 8 weeks. And things are looking really good, so let's get right into it. The Fola is essentially a Nora, but taken to the maximum level. That's part of the reason I was so enamored with the Nora, as it gave such a good sound in such a relatively affordable package. The Fola has the same shape, size, ergonomics, and cable type as the Nora, so if you're not familiar with the Nora, it's smaller than average, so fit and feel should be quite compatible for most ears. Inside the Fola resides a single dynamic driver with a diamond-like carbon coating, which I'm pretty sure is the same driver in the Nora, so there had better be some good reasons why this one costs so much more. Where the Fola differs is in the build quality and execution. Instead of a plastic housing, these have what appears to be aluminium shells with mirror finish faceplates. I say mirror finish, but in reality these pretty much are mirrors, so while fingerprints show up very clearly, they are obviously gorgeous pieces of jewelry at the same time. The next big difference is that these use tuning nozzles. While each nozzle does not contain any obvious damping material, the changes in nozzle material do actually subtly change the sound. Finally, the most important difference, in my opinion, is the modular cable. It includes terminations that are single-ended 3.5mm, balanced 4.4mm, and my favorite, the USB-C connector, which behaves like a dongle DAC. Also included in the box, you get 2 sets of silicon tips, one narrow bore and one wide bore, and the most clutch-looking carry case I've ever seen. While it doesn't suit my personal fashion sense, it is by far the best-looking stock case I've ever used, with extra padding, and it is very easy to use as the magnet's very strong. However, it is significantly larger than the average case. This part of the review needs to be broken down into a number of segments, as there are many levels of customization. So I'll try to break it down as concisely to start with, and then proceed with my preferred combination, and the review will be based on that. For anyone new to tip rolling, narrow bore tips tend to have better sub-bass performance, but sacrifice the sense of air and space, and in some cases this can affect the timbre and texture. Wide bore tips usually offer a more open, airy and textured sound, but also often sacrifice sub-bass volume, impact and texture. This somewhat mirrored my experience using the Fola's tips. I settled on the large, narrow bore tips. In other IEMs I've used with tuning nozzles, there were very clear differences, as they contained either a donut-shaped filter or a piece of foam, which made obvious changes. The Fola filters are so subtly similar, I had difficulty hearing the changes between them. According to the graph provided by Tanchjim, the tips are labeled L, S, and D. The L tip has the least bass and the strongest pinna gain and most treble. The S tip is the middle ground. The D tip has the most bass and the least pinna gain and treble, but with a little boost at 6 kHz. Naturally, I went with the D, and while I think many Fola users will also happily take the D, I don't consider the nozzle choice a big tuning factor. The biggest impact in sound will be dictated by your choice of cable termination. Using either 3.5mm or 4.4mm is fine if running your phone or DAP on Android, and you'll have some basic EQ options, but in my opinion, it just won't sound even as good as the Nora. Using the USB-C plug in tandem with the Tanchjim app, which offers parametric EQ, is truly where the Fola shines. I've been able to get the Fola to a place where every time I come back to it, no matter which headphone or in-ear monitor I was using previously, it just sounded right. Obviously, my personal EQ settings won't work for you, so that's not what I want to show you here. I tried out the Android and Windows desktop version of the app, and there are some important points to take note of. If you set your PEQ settings in one of the apps with your Fola plugged in, it will remember those settings when you take it to the next device, and it will overwrite or update the new settings in the second app. The next and most important point, in my opinion, is that the desktop version of the app is much more flexible, and settings can be made by simply dragging the points around the software UI, which makes it extremely easy to tune the settings on the fly while listening to music. Therefore, it feels much more like an analog control and responds in real time with almost no delay. Unfortunately, this cannot be done with the Android version, which only accepts numerical text input, which is slower by orders of magnitude. With those tuning choices in mind, I think this is one of the better IEMs I've ever tried out. I'm 100% sure that if I just tried it out in the shop or an audio show without the companion app, I would have a pretty low opinion of the Fola. So the reason to spend more and get the Fola over the Nora is that from the point of view of sound only, you unlock access to the parametric EQ, which is far superior to the simplistic EQ controls found in many DAPs and the Android system. As I mentioned previously, I got the Fola to a place where it just sounds right, but there are only a handful of small caveats that might turn a few off. Isolation is slightly below average, and soundstage is not huge. Looking at the positives, it's a very similar story to the Nora, as imaging is very precise, which also translates to good positional cues in 3D games. This review is probably useless without some brief comparisons, so here they are. The Fola impressions I am referencing will be with my preferred tips, nozzles, and parametric EQ settings. All other IEMs will be stock. Firstly, let's look at some other single dynamic driver IEMs. The Blon BL03 Mark II put up an incredibly good fight, unsurprisingly, only lagging behind in detail by a very small amount, with only a slight noticeable smearing in texture, but trailing behind miserably in ergonomics. The Nora is unsurprisingly damn close. To my ears and eyes, the Fola truly is the polished premium version of the Nora. Before using the companion app, the Fola is actually a step below the Nora to my ears, but after, it is a step above, leaving the Nora sounding a feather touch more plasticky in timbre. The EA1000 is still a beast, but a very different flavor, focusing on linear bass, crystal clear and slightly forward upper mids and treble with a great sense of air and wide staging. The bass presentation is too weak to my ears, but the timbre has a sense of hyper-realism that edges out over the Fola, especially with acoustic recordings, but can also lean into treble fatigue territory more easily. Next, a planar. The ether is much more neutral than my PEQ settings with the Fola, but this is a really tough call. Both are just superb, and the ether edges out in the lead with a bigger soundstage, but the Fola is far more versatile in tuning potential and ergonomics. And finally, some mixed driver in monitors around the same price bracket. The KE4 is a step down in detail, but it makes up for that with a larger soundstage and a very smooth, lush, bassy timbre. It's very much a different take on what a great IEM should sound like. Objectively, the Fola wins in almost every way, but subjectively, the KE4 is much more relaxing, spacious, and just a well-crafted flavor that I can't say has decisively lost the battle either. The SimGot Supermix 4 puts up a very good fight in detail, timbre, and tuning, but where it falls short is in the harmony between the drivers. It sounds like there's a touch of congestion, something that a well-tuned, high-end dynamic simply doesn't have to deal with, and the Fola is clearly a small step above. Finally, one of the big marketing points about the Fola is the companion desktop app, which provides 5.1 and 7.1 simulation. In reality, I think it sounds mostly like a V-shaped tuning filter, which affects psychoacoustics and can increase perceived scale of the sound, and how clearly you can hear distant footsteps or explosions and gunshots, etc., but it does not change the positional accuracy of the sound, which in any true stereo situation is entirely handled by the 3D graphics engine. So far, I have yet to hear any 5.1 or 7.1 simulation that actually works better than without, and this is no exception. At around $200, this is one of the most wholly complete IEM packages I have experienced, as it offers a full range of customization and a parametric EQ that offers just about enough tuning flexibility in a small package. If you've only dabbled with entry-level IEMs and are looking for something high-end, but you want to get the most out of a single purchase, the Fola almost does it all. The only place I can objectively mark it down is the presentation of sub-bass, which is lacking impact and texture in the absolute lowest registers below 50 Hz, something totally common in most IEMs under €1,000. At every step, from unboxing to finally customizing it to my taste and using it regularly, it always gave me a reassuring feeling that Tanchjim engineers have a real passion for detail. Even simple things like the cable being more tangle resistant, the hardware having very low tolerances, and the seamless integration of their apps across multiple platforms with the set and forget PEQ made this a joyful and stress-free experience. I think it's easy to make a good sounding single dynamic driver in a monitor, but going forward with my reviews, this is one of the great ones that will not only be a gatekeeper for single dynamics in this price bracket, but for IEMs in general. If you don't want to deal with parametric EQ and software, this isn't the one for you. But the time you invest into crafting your preferred sound is well worth the reward. That's it for now, take it easy, and I'll see you in the next one.